it's completely blocked. Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. Today we have in a Citroen C4 SpaceTourer, and this has the 1.2 PureTech engine, which we're going to be changing the wet belt on and checking out for a low oil pressure fault, which we suspect the belt has broken up and gone into the oil pump. So let's get into that now and have a look. So this is the little 1.2 PureTech engine, and what we're going to be doing today is the wet belt, because it's coming for a low oil pressure fault. And inside here you can see the timing belt, which runs in the oil, and I don't know whether you can see the condition of that. It's actually cracking and horrible, and what happens is the teeth come off and they go up the oil strainer and cause oil starvation to the engine. This engine still runs and drives fine, but has got the light just come on, so hopefully we're going to find out that it's just needs replacing and everything will be okay. But let's start the strip down. So we're going to strip down all of this top end here. We're going to take the coils off, air in pipe, the boost pipe, the injector rail, fuel rail, and we're going to take the
So we've done this bit on a time lapse here,
so
as it's quite a long process, but as you can see here, I'm just taking off all of the upper parts of the engine, the boost pipe, the air intake pipe for the turbo, and then we're going to take off all the coils. All the wiring has to come out of the way. Here we're just going to remove all the air pipes and the air box. You can just pop that up and move it back. You don't have to take it completely out. Then we take off the fuel lines. And we're going to try and get that wiring right out the way so we can take the cam cover off with no issues. Here we're taking off a load of 8mm bolts that hold the plastic part of the cam cover on the top.
Okay, so now we've got the top end pretty much stripped down. We've still just got to take out the injectors and the fuel rail and take this top cam cover off to put our locking tools on the cams. But here you can see the belt is all cracking and just not very nice. So what we're going to do is we're going to go up in the air, put our locking pins in underneath and have a look and see if we can get this new belt on. Okay, so now we're up in the air. We've just take the under tray off and remove the inner wheel arch out to the side, which gives us visuals for the auxiliary belt and the lower pulley. And we've got access to the oil filter and the sump. So before we go any further, we're going to do some investigating work. We're going to take the sump off and the fuel and the oil filter off, and we're going to see what debris.
So to start things off, we're just going to drain the oil out.
So we
and
do
I
that
don't
now.
know if you can see, but it is quite black and horrible there. Take the filter off and just have a good old clean down. The next thing that we need to do is undo all of the 8mm bolts holding the sump on, and the sump is held on with some gasket sealer, which is obviously quite tight. So take a little screwdriver, pry it down very gently, not to damage any of the surfaces or bend the sump.
Wow, okay, so now we've drained the oil, taken the oil filter off, and we've got our sump. Doesn't seem to look too bad. The oil was very dirty, but inside this oil strainer, it's completely blocked. You see all that in the strainer there? So that there is putting our low oil pressure light on, because dirt and debris is clogging up the oil pump filter there. So we're going to have to clean that out thoroughly before we carry on. So I've just got a bit of rag here. I'm just going to see if we can scrape off a lot of what is blocking this hole, so I can show you guys. So this here is all Cambelt material, big chunks of it blocking up your strainer. So let's go and clean that out properly. Okay, so we've been cleaning this out for about 5 minutes now, and you can see the difference there. Still a little bit more cleaning to go, but I just wanted to show you the gauze that's in there, obviously doing a fantastic job stopping all the stuff going in. But that is the main issue with one of these engines. If you don't have regular maintenance, the correct oil grade, or your belt changed, then this becomes blocked, starves the engine of oil. So let's carry on, get this thing cleaned out all the way, and then change the belt so we're all good. Okay, so now we have the oil strainer all cleaned out. We come back down now, and we're going to take off the rest of this top covers so we can put our cam locking tools on, and then we can change the belt. So let's just get into that now. So to carry on with what we've been doing, we're going to take off the rest of the bolts, the servo pump on the side here. We're just going to undo the top 2 bolts, and the bottom bolt we can get out most of the way, and it will just sit out to the side. Then we've got lots of 8mm bolts that hold this carrier down. And there's 2 fiddly bolts right down by the turbo here. But take your time, you can get them out. Then undo the rest of the 8mm bolts holding it all down. Okay, so now we've undone the 6 bazillion screws that hold this top cover on. We can now try and wiggle it out, just like this. Not forgetting to grab our piston for the high pressure fuel pump. We'll take the high pressure fuel pump out of that cam carrier and put it all back in after, so the piston sits down exactly where it should be. Don't worry about that. So now we are exposed with the cams, the cam belt and everything like that. Now we can clean up all of this edge ready, but first of all we're going to put our cam locking tools in. That way we can then change the belt. So now we have our cam locking tool in position. We can use 2 of the original cover screws just to lock it down in place. So now that's our cam locking tool, goes over these square parts of the lobes here, locks down onto the cylinder head, and then you bolt up in the middle, so those cams cannot move now. Underneath there's a pin that goes into the flywheel, which we're going to pop in now, and then we can take the belt off. Okay, so now we're back up in the air. We want to take our auxiliary belt off. So we've got a 13mm multi-spline socket which goes on the tensioner, and then we can just take the tension off the belt and just slip it off just like that. So that will come out of the way. If you're reusing the belt, check the orientation of the belt and hold it to one side. Put it back on the same way it came off. So now we have that off, we need to get this lower pulley off. We have just put in our lower crank pin, which is this one here, just goes up into the flywheel. So now with the engine all timed up, we can take off those 13mm bolts up there. Now with all them bolts undone, we can wiggle the pulley off. It is connected to another belt for the water pump just behind it. So now we have access to the lower bolt and this cover here, which holds the tensioner and the idler behind it. And that's just held in with 4 10mm, and it will have a seal on it as well. So let's get them off. Okay, with them 4 bolts undone, hopefully this will just pull off, just like that. And it just has a little rubber seal, which you can see here. So now we have access to the tensioner and the idler pulley, which we need to take out now. That's the idler out. And that's the tensioner out. Now we need to undo our bottom bolt, which is at 18mm. That's our bottom bolt out. If we put two of these 13mm back in here, just loosely, we should be able to wiggle out this lower pulley. There we go. A little bit of wiggling and the front half comes away from the crank gear itself. And we can just pull out our little pulley. We're going to change this oil seal as well. So now the belt is free, we can take the belt through the top and out. Okay, so now we're back up the top. Just crack off these bolts here. They were tighter than that. Just wasn't filming. And then we can undo these because the belt won't come past the pulley. So once it's all locked up in position, you can crack these bolts off. And then once you've undone them, take them off, set them aside, don't get them mixed up. They do have a little keyway inside that matches up on the cam there. So set them to one side. Now they're off, we can take our belt and gently pull it out. We're just going to inspect the belt here, and you can see where all the fibres are breaking off along the side. It's cracking like mad all along, and all them fibres go into the oil. And a lot of these, especially Fords, they actually break off all the teeth, and it's the teeth that clog up the oil strainer. But this one is probably well overdue. Okay, so now it's time to go back together. So we're using a genuine belt only, and we're going to start the process exactly how we took it apart, but we're going back together. So we're just going to feed the belt down. And we're going to get our cam wheels. Just going to line them back up, make sure the keyway's located, and put your bolt back in. put it back in loosely. We're going to do the same for the other side. So we've got a belt on the top, we've got our pulleys back on, located and locked, and the bolts are just nipped up at the moment. So now we're going to go back down below and we're going to put in our lower bits and the tensioner and the idler. Okay, so now we're back down the bottom end. We just pop out this lower sill, make sure everything's all nice and clean. And you can see the belt here, just hanging down in its position. So we can get our little pulley and rest that back in there. And then our lower pulley part here has this little lug which locates into the side of the crank there, so it can only go one way. So we just slide that into position like that, and you can see it can only move a tiny bit, so it's located where it needs to be. We can pop our lower bolt back in. So we can go in with our tensioner, which locates just behind in these little cutouts. Now we've got the idler pulley. So once they're all in loosely, we can do up our idler pulley. And then we need a 6mm Allen key so we can do up our tensioner. Once you've turned it anti-clockwise to the little white tab just here, will line up with the mark there, and then you can lock it down. So now we know we've got the correct tension, got idler done up, tensioner done up, now we can do up the bottom bolt. Okay, so our centre bolt here is now tightened down. I just had to come off to find the specs, 50 Newton meters, 180 degrees. So now that's tight, we can now fit our brand new oil seal, seated all the way around. And that's your nice new oil seal fitted. Now we can go back on with our front cover, put a new gasket in there. Okay, so that's our front cover fitted. So now we can go back on with our water pump, belt, lower pulley, auxiliary belt. And finally, the auxiliary belt. She's just like that. So now this side's all done, we're going to go back up and we're going to tighten up our cam gear bolts and start putting the top end back together. Okay, so back up the top now. We've just done up our cam gear bolts, 20 Newton meters and 120 degrees. And we've just taken off our timing locking tool, painted a couple of marks just to be sure, spun it over 4 times and they all line back up and the tool fits back on perfectly, so the timing spot on. So now we can clean up all of this top part and start to rebuild it. Let's do that now.
Okay, so once all the surfaces are nice and clean, then you can start to put all the covers back on, put all the bolts in all the way around, tighten them down equally, and then the arduous task of putting all of the parts back together in the right order has started. As you can see, we're going through this pretty quick, but once you've got everything going, it does go back together pretty simply and nice and easy. Just got to make sure that you don't leave anything undone or unplugged, otherwise you will get fault codes.
Okay, so that was a pretty long time lapse, but the top end is all back together now. So all we need to do now is go under, put the sump back on, put the oil filter back on, and then we're going to fill it up with oil and go for a first start. Okay, so we've got our sump fitted back on. Now we've got our new oil filter. Oh, nice and tight. Now that's all back on, let's go and fill it up with oil and then try and start it. So now we've got our 3.5 litres of oil in. We're just gonna disconnect our spark plugs just so we can turn it over and get some oil pressure up, because we've had it off for a long time. So she turns over. That's a good start. So now we're going to plug these back in. Just like that. And now let's start her up and see if she fires. She's running. We don't have a low oil pressure fault. That would normally come up right here in a big red box with a load of noise straight away, but this seems to be running perfect. So we're just going to run this now for a little while, get it warm, and we'll go on a road test, and hopefully that's the job done. So there you have it. That's how to change your wet belt and find your low oil pressure fault in a 1.2 PureTech PSA engine. If you like the content, hit that thumbs up, hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you in the next one.